Mile marker 47 on Highway 9 stretches through nothing but desert scrub and silence. It's the kind of road where cell towers don't reach and help is a prayer away. Sarah Martinez, 8 months pregnant and driving home from her night shift at the hospital, never expected to find a man bleeding out beside his overturned Harley in the middle of nowhere. She should have kept driving. Any rational person would have. But Sarah was a trauma nurse, and saving lives was hardwired into her DNA. As she knelt beside the unconscious biker, applying pressure to his wounds with trembling hands, she saw his face clearly for the first time in 3 years. It was Jake Sullivan, the man who had vanished from her life without explanation, the man who didn't know she was carrying his child. But as Jake's eyes fluttered open in the ambulance, Sarah realized something was terribly wrong. He had no memory of who she was, no recognition in his eyes, and the leather jacket he wore bore the colors of a motorcycle club that had been hunting him for months. Why had Jake erased his past, and what dangerous game was he playing? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ambulance swayed as it took another turn toward Phoenix General, sirens wailing through the desert night. Sarah gripped the metal rail, her other hand instinctively protecting her swollen belly as she watched the paramedic work on Jake. Every few seconds, his eyes would drift to her, confusion clouding his features. "Do I know you?" he whispered, voice barely audible over the medical equipment. Sarah's throat tightened. 3 years ago, she would have given anything to hear his voice again. Now, faced with his blank stare, she felt like she was drowning. "No," she managed. "I'm just a nurse who happened to be driving by." The lie tasted bitter. She studied his face, searching for any flicker of recognition, any sign that somewhere deep inside he remembered what they'd shared, the late-night conversations that stretched until dawn, the way he'd traced her face with his fingertips like he was memorizing it. The morning she'd woken up to find nothing but a hastily scrawled note. "I'm sorry, I have to go. Don't look for me." She'd been pregnant for 6 weeks then, though she hadn't known it yet. "The jacket," the paramedic muttered to his partner, nodding toward Jake's leather vest. "Those patches. Isn't that the Devil's Canyon crew?" Sarah's blood chilled. She'd heard whispers about Devil's Canyon Mac during her shifts at the hospital. Drug running, violence, protection rackets. Nothing like the Jake she'd known, the one who'd worked construction, who'd read poetry to her in bed, who'd talked about wanting a different life. Scan came back. The paramedic's radio crackled. "Patient has significant head trauma, possible traumatic brain injury affecting memory centers." Jake's hand moved slightly, and Sarah found herself reaching for it before she could stop herself. His fingers were calloused, just like she remembered, but they wore new scars now. When he squeezed back, it was with the desperate grip of someone trying to anchor themselves to anything familiar. "The woman," Jake said suddenly, his voice stronger. "There was a woman, dark hair. She was—" He struggled, pressing his free hand to his temple. "I can't remember her face, but I dream about her sometimes." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "Maybe when your head heals—" Jake's grip tightened. "It's not from the accident. I've been having these dreams for months. Like there's this whole piece of my life that's just gone." The ambulance pulled into the hospital bay, and Sarah reluctantly let go of his hand as the doors swung open. The familiar chaos of the emergency department surrounded them. Shouting nurses, beeping monitors, the sharp smell of antiseptic. As they wheeled Jake toward Trauma Bay 3, Sarah caught sight of 2 men in leather jackets standing near the information desk. One of them turned, revealing a face marked by a jagged scar running from his left eye to his jaw. When he spotted Jake on the gurney, his expression shifted from boredom to deadly interest. Sarah's training kicked in, pushing aside her personal turmoil. Whatever history she and Jake shared, whatever dangerous situation he'd gotten himself into, right now he was vulnerable and alone. The men by the desk looked like predators who'd found wounded prey. She made a decision that would complicate everything. "Excuse me," she called to the attending physician. "I'm Sarah Martinez, trauma nurse. I was first on scene. If you need someone to stay with the patient during treatment, I can assist." Dr. Chen nodded gratefully. "We're short-staffed tonight. I could use the help." As they pushed Jake's gurney past the men in leather, Sarah kept her eyes forward. But she felt their gaze follow them, calculating and cold. Whatever Jake had gotten himself mixed up in, whoever he'd become in the 3 years since he'd disappeared from her life, one thing was clear: he was in danger. And despite everything, despite the pain and the unanswered questions, Sarah couldn't bring herself to abandon him again. The metallic taste of fear coated Sarah's mouth as she knelt beside the broken body of Marcus Chen. 7 years had done nothing to diminish the sharp angles of his face or the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. Even unconscious and bleeding, he was unmistakably the man who had whispered promises in her ear during late-night study sessions, who had traced her spine with gentle fingers, who had vanished without explanation the morning after graduation. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency despite the tremor in her chest. Primary survey first: airway, breathing, circulation. She tilted his head back, checking for obstructions, feeling the familiar weight of his jaw under her palm. His breathing was shallow but present, pupils reactive though unequal. Probable head injury, definitely internal bleeding given the rigidity of his abdomen. The motorcycle lay twisted 20 feet away, chrome and black metal scattered across asphalt like broken bones. No skid marks. He hadn't even tried to stop before hitting whatever had sent him flying. Sarah reached for her phone to call 911, then hesitated as her fingers brushed against something protruding from Marcus's leather jacket. A manila envelope, partially torn, with what looked like photographs spilling out. She shouldn't look. Patient, privacy was sacred, but one image had fallen face up in the gravel. Her breath caught. It was a surveillance photo of her, taken recently outside Mercy General. She was clearly visible walking to her car, her pregnant profile unmistakable under the parking lot lights. Someone had written a date in red ink across the bottom, 3 days ago. With shaking fingers, she pulled out another photo. Marcus leaving what appeared to be a government building, shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit. Another showed him entering a warehouse at night. The final image made her blood freeze. Her apartment building with a red circle drawn around her bedroom window. "Jesus, Marcus, what have you gotten yourself into?" His eyes fluttered open at the sound of her voice, unfocused and glassy with pain. For a moment he seemed confused, then recognition dawned across his features like a sunrise. "Sarah?" His voice was barely a whisper. You're here. Don't try to talk. You've been in an accident." She pressed her fingers to his wrist, counting his pulse. "Too fast, too weak. I'm calling for help." "No." His hand shot up, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "No ambulance. They'll find me. Marcus, you're bleeding internally. You need surgery, possibly. Listen to me." His grip tightened, and she could see the desperation in his dark eyes. "I didn't know about the baby. I swear I didn't know until 3 days ago." Sarah's world tilted sideways. "How could you possibly?" "They've been watching you because of me, because of what I know." A cough racked his body, specks of blood appearing on his lips. "I came here to warn you, to protect you." "Protect me from what?" The photos felt like they were burning her fingers. "Who's watching me?" Before he could answer, the distant sound of engines cut through the night air. Not the steady rumble of normal traffic, but the deliberate growl of vehicles moving with purpose. Marcus's face went white. "They found me." He struggled to sit up, gasping with the effort. "Sarah, listen carefully. There's a key in my boot. Left one. Get it. You need to stay still." "Get the key." The urgency in his voice cut through her medical training. With trembling hands, she reached into his boot and found a small silver key attached to a numbered tag. "Storage Unit 247 on Riverside Drive. Everything you need to know is there." His breathing was becoming more labored. "Take the photos, burn everything else in the envelope, but keep the photos safe." The engine sounds were getting closer. Sarah could see headlights cresting the hill behind them. still distant but approaching fast. "Marcus, I don't understand any of this. Why did you leave? Why didn't you?" "Because I loved you too much to destroy your life." His hand found hers, and for a moment she was 22 again, feeling that same electric connection that had once made her believe in forever. "I thought if I disappeared you'd be safe, but they found out about us anyway, about the baby. The baby she'd lost 2 months after he vanished. The baby he never knew existed." Sarah's throat tightened with 7 years of suppressed grief and rage. "There was no baby, Marcus. I miscarried. You left me alone to deal with it." The anguish that crossed his face was so raw she almost looked away. "Sarah, The headlights were close enough now to make out individual vehicles. 3 of them, moving fast and purpose-driven. "Go." Marcus squeezed her hand one last time. "Take your car and go. Don't trust anyone, not even the police." "And Sarah?" His voice was fading as shock set in. "I'm sorry. For everything." The first vehicle was only a quarter-mile away now, and Sarah had to make a choice that would change everything. The emergency room at Mercy General buzzed with controlled chaos, but Maya moved through it with practiced efficiency despite the weight of her pregnancy and the emotional turmoil churning beneath her professional facade. She'd managed to push thoughts of Jake to the back of her mind during her shift, focusing instead on suturing wounds, administering medications, and comforting patients who needed her steady presence. But as midnight approached, her resolve began to crack. "You've been quiet tonight," observed Dr. Sarah Chen, Maya's closest friend and the attending physician on duty. She leaned against the nurse's station, studying Maya with the keen eye of someone trained to notice details others might miss. "Just tired," Maya replied, updating a patient chart on the computer. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed, and she hoped Sarah wouldn't notice. Tired, or thinking about the accident victim from this afternoon. Maya's hands stilled on the keyboard. Sarah had been in surgery when the ambulance arrived, but hospital gossip traveled faster than wildfire. "What did you hear?" "Enough to know that you knew him. Marcus mentioned you seemed affected." Sarah pulled up a chair, settling beside Maya with the determination of someone prepared for a long conversation. "Want to talk about it?" Before Maya could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her heart skipped as she read the message. "Maya, it's Jake. Can we talk? I'm in room 314. Sarah glanced at the screen. "Jake? As in Jake Morrison? The one who disappeared 3 years ago without a word." Maya's voice was barely above a whisper. She touched her rounded belly instinctively, a gesture that had become second nature over the past 6 months. "Oh, Maya." Sarah's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "Does he know? How could he? I didn't even know I was pregnant until after he was gone." The words tasted bitter. Maya had discovered her pregnancy 2 months after Jake's abrupt departure, alone and devastated in the bathroom of their shared apartment. By then, his phone number was disconnected, his job abandoned, his life erased as if he'd never existed. Another text appeared. "Please, I know you're here. I need to explain." Sarah leaned closer, reading over Maya's shoulder. "What are you going to do?" Maya stared at the phone, memories flooding back unbidden. Jake's laugh echoing through their tiny kitchen, the way he'd hold her close during thunderstorms because he knew they made her anxious. The morning she'd woken up to find only a hastily scrawled note. "I'm sorry. I have to go. Don't try to find me." "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants answers, but part of me thinks some doors should stay closed." "And the baby?" Maya's hand moved protectively over her stomach. "What about her? She has a right to know her father, and he has a right to know about her." The truth of Sarah's words hit like a physical blow. Maya had spent months convincing herself that she and her daughter were better off without Jake, that his abandonment was proof enough of his character. But seeing him broken and vulnerable on that highway had stirred something she'd thought long buried. "What if he leaves again?" Maya's voice cracked. "I can't go through that twice, and I won't put my daughter through it at all." Then don't give him the chance to leave. Talk to him, get your answers, and decide on your terms. Sarah stood, squeezing Maya's shoulder gently. But hiding won't protect either of you forever. Maya's phone buzzed a third time. I saw your ring. Congratulations. I hope he makes you happy. Her breath caught. She looked down at her left hand, where a simple silver band caught the fluorescent lights. It wasn't an engagement ring. She'd bought it herself months ago, tired of well-meaning questions and pitying looks, but Jake had assumed. Without fully deciding, Maya found herself walking toward the elevator. The third floor felt different at night, quieter, with only the soft beeping of machines and the occasional murmur of late-shift nurses. Room 314 was at the end of the hall, and she could see a dim light beneath the door. She knocked softly. "Come in." Jake was sitting up in bed, looking far more alert than he had any right to after his injuries. The harsh hospital lighting revealed details she'd missed during the emergency. The scar running along his left temple, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the way his hands gripped the bed rails as if anchoring himself against some invisible storm. "You came," he said, and the relief in his voice was unmistakable. "I almost didn't." Maya remained by the door, maintaining distance between them. "You have 10 minutes. Jake's eyes searched her face, lingering on the changes time had wrought. "You look beautiful, Maya. Pregnancy suits you." "Don't." The word came out sharper than intended. "Don't pretend this is some casual reunion. You left, Jake. You disappeared without explanation, and now you want to chat about how I look? You're right. I'm sorry." He took a shaky breath. "There's so much I need to tell you. Things I should have said before I left. Then talk." The emergency room doors burst open as Sarah wheeled Marcus through on the gurney, her voice cutting through the chaos with practiced authority. 28-year-old male, motorcycle versus semi, multiple lacerations, possible internal bleeding, vitals stabilizing but critical. Dr. Jennifer Walsh looked up from another patient, her eyes immediately focusing on the incoming trauma. "Bay 3, let's move." She paused mid-stride when she saw Sarah Carter. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be on leave." "Found him on Highway 47, Sarah replied tersely, her hands still pressed against the largest wound on Marcus's abdomen. "No one else around for miles." Jennifer's expression shifted to one of professional concern mixed with confusion as they transferred Marcus to the trauma bay bed. "Sarah, step back. Let Martinez take over." But Sarah couldn't move. Her feet felt rooted to the linoleum floor as she watched the medical team swarm around Marcus. His face, now cleaned of most of the blood and dirt, was unmistakably the same one that had whispered promises to her 7 years ago. The same one that had disappeared without explanation, leaving her to discover his absence through an empty apartment and disconnected phone number. "Sarah," Jennifer's voice was sharper now. "I need you to step out." The words broke through her trance. She nodded mechanically and backed toward the door, her scrubs stained with his blood, her mind reeling. As she reached the threshold, she heard Marcus mumble something in his semi-conscious state. "Emma. Have to tell. Emma." Sarah's breath caught. Emma. The name hit her like a physical blow. Who was Emma? A wife? A girlfriend? The questions multiplied in her mind as she stumbled toward the break room, her hands shaking as she tried to process what had just happened. She found herself in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. Her face was pale, her usually neat ponytail disheveled, and there were streaks of Marcus's blood on her cheek. She turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on her face, trying to wash away the surreal nature of the last hour. The bathroom door opened, and Jennifer walked in. "Okay, want to tell me what that was about? You looked like you'd seen a ghost in there." Sarah dried her face with paper towels, avoiding Jennifer's concerned gaze. "I'm fine. Just, it was intense, finding him like that." "Sarah, I've known you for 3 years. You don't fall apart over trauma cases. What's really going on?" Before Sarah could answer, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Have something that belongs to you. M's bike had your business card in the saddlebag. Call me. State Trooper Davidson. Sarah stared at the message, confusion deepening. Her business card? She hadn't given Marcus anything. She barely carried business cards, and when she did, they were for her private nursing services, not the hospital. Sarah? Jennifer was still waiting for an answer. I knew him, Sarah finally admitted. A long time ago, before I moved here. Jennifer's eyebrows rose. An old friend? The word friend felt inadequate and somehow dishonest. Something like that. Her phone rang before Jennifer could ask more questions. The caller ID showed the same number from the text. This is Sarah. Miss Carter. This is Trooper Davidson. I'm at the accident scene and I found something strange. The motorcycle registration shows the bike belongs to a Marcus Reed, but there's a storage compartment with some personal items that have your name on them. Sarah's heart pounded. What kind of items? Looks like letters, old ones, and a photograph. Ma'am, I have to ask, did you know the victim was carrying these things? Sarah leaned against the bathroom wall for support. Marcus had been carrying letters with her name on them after all these years? No, I had no idea. Well, they're evidence for now, but I thought you should know. The photograph, it's of you. Looks like it was taken at a hospital. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the day Marcus had surprised her at the clinic where she used to work. He'd insisted on taking her picture in her scrubs, saying he wanted to remember her exactly as she was, dedicated, caring, beautiful in her element. She'd thought it was romantic at the time. Miss Carter? You still there? Yes, I'm here. Trooper Davidson. Is there anything else? Any indication of where he was heading? Funny you should ask. GPS shows he was headed toward your town specifically. Had the hospital address programmed in. Sarah's blood ran cold. Marcus had been coming to find her. But why now? And why had he kept those letters, that photograph, all these years? I'll be in touch if we need anything else, Trooper Davidson said before hanging up. Sarah stared at her phone, her mind spinning with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Through the bathroom door, she could hear the continued commotion of the trauma bay, where the man who had once held her heart was fighting for his life. The fluorescent lights in the hospital corridor cast harsh shadows as Sarah made her way to the ICU at dawn. She'd barely slept, her mind churning with questions about the leather jacket and its contents. The pregnancy exhaustion felt heavier today, each step requiring conscious effort. Marcus was awake when she entered his room, staring at the ceiling with hollow eyes. The ventilator had been removed overnight, leaving only the steady beep of monitors to fill the silence. His face was a roadmap of cuts and bruises, but it was unmistakably him, the same sharp jawline, the same dark eyes that had once made her forget her own name. "You look like hell," she said, checking his chart with professional detachment. His voice came out as a rasp. "Sarah." Don't she adjusted his fore-drip without meeting his gaze. "I'm your nurse. That's all. The baby," he started. "None of your concern." The words came out sharper than intended. She felt his eyes following her movements as she recorded his vitals, her hands steadier than her heartbeat. "How far along?" Sarah finally looked at him directly, her green eyes flashing with anger. "You don't get to ask that. You don't get to know anything about my life." Marcus struggled to sit up, wincing. "Sarah, please, I know I have no right, but—" "You're right. You have no right." She moved to leave, but his next words stopped her cold. "Someone's trying to kill me." The morning shift change brought Dr. Chen, who seemed surprised to find Sarah still in Marcus's room. She'd been there for 20 minutes, listening to a story that sounded like something from a crime thriller. "The motorcycle wasn't an accident," Marcus explained, his voice growing stronger with each sentence. "I've been investigating a pharmaceutical company for the past 2 years, Blackwater Industries. They've been falsifying clinical trial data, bribing FDA officials, covering up deaths from their new cardiac medication." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her belly. "What does that have to do with—" "I'm a journalist now. Investigative reporting." He gestured weakly toward the closet where his belongings were stored. "Everything's in my jacket. Photos, documents, recorded conversations, enough evidence to bring down their entire operation. Why should I believe you? Because 3 people connected to this story are already dead, and yesterday a black sedan ran me off Highway 9 at 60 miles an hour. Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Rivera, how are we feeling this morning?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," Marcus replied, never taking his eyes off Sarah. "Motorcycle, actually, but close enough." Dr. Chen smiled at his own joke while reviewing the chart. "Your recovery is remarkable. We'll need to keep you for observation, but if your condition remains stable, you could be discharged by Friday." After the doctor left, Sarah found herself alone with Marcus again. The weight of his revelations pressed against her chest like a physical force. "There's more," he said quietly. "The reason I left you, the reason I disappeared without explanation, I don't want to hear it. My father worked for Blackwater. He was one of their researchers, and he discovered what they were doing. When he tried to expose them, they had him killed and made it look like a heart attack." Sarah's knees felt weak. She sank into the visitor's chair, her professional composure finally cracking. "I was 23 and stupid and thought I could protect you by staying away. They threatened everyone I cared about." His voice broke slightly. "I've been living under different names for 5 years, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to bring them down. Your father died of a heart attack. I remember you at the funeral. You were devastated, but you never said anything about..." "Because I didn't know then. I only found out later, when I started investigating the company he worked for. The medication that supposedly saved cardiac patients was actually killing them, and my father was about to prove it." The room fell silent except for the rhythmic beeping of machines. Sarah studied Marcus's face, searching for any sign of deception. The Marcus she'd known had been passionate but reckless, prone to grand gestures and dramatic pronouncements. This man seemed different, harder, more focused, carrying weight that went deeper than physical injuries. "If what you're saying is true," she said slowly, "then you being here puts everyone at risk. The hospital, the staff, patients. I know. That's why I need to leave as soon as possible. You have a punctured lung and internal bleeding. You're not going anywhere." "Sarah, you don't understand. They will find me here. And when they do..." He reached out, his fingers barely brushing her wrist. "I won't let anything happen to you or your baby. I promise." The touch sent electricity through her skin, 5 years of buried emotions threatening to surface. She pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. "Your promises don't mean much to me anymore, Marcus." But even as she said it, she knew she was already caught in his web of secrets once again. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor cast harsh shadows as Sarah paced outside the ICU, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. 24 hours had passed since she'd found Marcus bleeding on the highway, and the weight of unspoken truths pressed against her chest like a physical force. Dr. Reeves emerged from the unit, pulling off his surgical cap with tired hands. "He's stable," he said, meeting Sarah's anxious gaze. "The surgery went well, but he's not out of the woods yet. The next 40 to 8 hours will be critical." Sarah nodded, though her throat felt too tight to speak. She'd volunteered to stay, claiming professional obligation, but the truth was far more complicated. The manila envelope Marcus had been clutching sat heavy in her locker downstairs, its contents a mystery that gnawed at her resolve to maintain distance. "Sarah?" Dr. Reeves studied her with concern. "You should go home. Get some rest. You've been here since yesterday." "I'm fine," she lied, though exhaustion pulled at her bones. "Someone should be here when he wakes up. He has no emergency contacts listed." The doctor's expression softened. "You knew him before the accident?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications Sarah wasn't ready to unpack. "A long time ago," she said finally. After Dr. Reeves left, Sarah found herself drawn back to Marcus's bedside. The machines surrounding him beeped in steady rhythm, a mechanical lullaby that did nothing to calm her racing thoughts. His face, peaceful in unconsciousness, looked younger somehow, more like the man she'd fallen in love with 7 years ago. She studied the scar along his jawline, a thin white line she didn't remember. How many other changes had the years carved into him? How many stories lay hidden beneath his skin? The envelope seemed to burn through her thoughts, demanding attention. Whatever secrets it contained had been important enough for Marcus to clutch even as his life bled away. Part of her wanted to respect his privacy, but a larger part, the part that had loved him, that had waited for explanations that never came, needed answers. "Sarah?" A voice from the doorway made her jump. Detective Ray Morrison stood there, notepad in hand, his expression apologetic. "Sorry to startle you. I need to ask a few questions about the accident." She'd known this moment would come. "Of course." Morrison settled into the visitor's chair, his bulk making it creak. "You said you didn't know the victim personally, but the nurses mentioned you've been here around the clock." Heat crept up Sarah's neck. "I'm the one who found him. I feel responsible." "Understandable." Morrison made a note. "Can you walk me through what you saw again? Any details you might have forgotten?" Sarah recounted the scene. The overturned motorcycle, Marcus's injuries, the desperate race to save his life. She omitted the moment of recognition, the way her heart had stopped when she'd seen his face. "Any idea what might have caused the accident?" Morrison asked. "Road conditions were good. No other vehicles involved. Sometimes people just lose control," Sarah said carefully. Morrison studied her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling he could see through her deflections. The bike was traveling at high speed when it went off the road. Could suggest he was running from something. The word sent a chill through her. Running from? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Morrison closed his notepad. "If he says anything when he wakes up, anything at all, I need you to call me immediately." After the detective left, Sarah sat alone with her churning thoughts. Running from something. The phrase echoed in her mind, mixing with older memories. Marcus's sudden departures, his reluctance to discuss his past, the way he'd always seemed to be looking over his shoulder. She thought of the envelope again, and this time the pull was too strong to resist. Her shift had ended hours ago, and the night nurse wouldn't question her absence. With quick steps, she made her way to the employee locker room. The envelope felt heavier than it should as she pulled it from her locker. Her name was written across the front in Marcus's familiar handwriting, the ink slightly smudged from the rain. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Pictures of her leaving the hospital, walking to her car, sitting in the park near her apartment. Some were clearly recent, showing her pregnant profile, but others were older, dating back years. Her hands shook as she found a letter beneath the photos, Marcus's handwriting cramped and urgent. "Sarah, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I know you have questions, and you deserve answers. The truth is, I never left you by choice. They found me in Portland, said they'd hurt you if I didn't disappear. I've been watching over you ever since, trying to keep you safe. But they found me again, and this time I won't run. The safety deposit box key is taped under your mailbox, box 247 at First National. Trust no one else. I'm sorry for everything. I never stopped loving you. M." The letter slipped from her numb fingers, floating to the floor like a white flag of surrender. The antiseptic smell of the hospital corridor felt different now, charged with an undercurrent of dread that made Emma's stomach churn. She'd walked these halls countless times, but tonight they seemed endless, stretching before her like a maze with no exit. The manila envelope in her hands felt heavier than it should, its contents having shifted the ground beneath her feet. Dr. Martinez had been gentle when he'd handed it to her, his usually confident demeanor softened by something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "The blood work came back," he'd said quietly. "There's something you need to see." Now, standing outside Jake's room, Emma stared at the numbers on the lab report until they blurred together. The genetic markers didn't lie. The rare blood type that had made her such a valuable donor, the same type that had saved Jake's life, it wasn't a coincidence. The probability calculations at the bottom of the page spelled it out in clinical terms that made her hands shake. She pushed open the door to find Jake awake. propped up against pillows, his color significantly better than it had been days ago. Her blood had done that. Her blood that shared markers, indicating a familial relationship that made her feel sick to contemplate. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Jake said, his voice still rough but stronger. "Everything okay?" Emma closed the door behind her, leaning against it for support. "We need to talk." Something in her tone must have warned him, because his expression shifted, becoming guarded. "About what?" "About why my blood was such a perfect match for yours." She held up the report, her voice barely steady. "About why these genetic markers suggest we're related." The color that had returned to Jake's face drained away completely. His eyes fixed on the papers in her hand, and she saw something she'd never seen before. Fear. Real bone-deep terror. "Emma, I can explain." "Can you?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "Because I've been trying to make sense of this for hours, and every scenario I come up with makes me feel sick." Jake struggled to sit up straighter, wincing as the movement pulled at his injuries. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." Emma stepped closer to the bed, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "Tell me why a routine blood compatibility test is showing markers that suggest we share DNA. Tell me why the man I was in love with, the man whose baby I'm carrying, might be my brother." The last word hung in the air between them like a physical blow. Jake's face went white, and for a moment Emma thought he might pass out again. "I'm not your brother," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "Then explain this." She thrust the report at him, watching as his eyes scanned the numbers she'd already memorized. "Explain why Dr. Martinez looked at me like I was some kind of tragic case study." Jake closed his eyes, his head falling back against the pillows. When he opened them again, Emma saw resignation there, as if he'd been carrying this weight for longer than she could imagine. "Your father," he said slowly, each word seeming to cost him. "Robert Chen. What did he tell you about his family?" Emma's chest tightened. "He died when I was 12. What does this have to do with—" "He was my uncle." The words hit her like a physical blow, sending her stumbling backward until she hit the wall. The manila envelope slipped from her numb fingers, scattering papers across the sterile floor. "That's impossible," she whispered. But even as she said it, pieces began clicking into place with horrible clarity. The way Jake had looked at her that first night in the diner, as if he'd recognized something, the questions about her family, her background, the sudden departure that had never made sense. "My mother was Robert's sister," Jake continued, his voice hollow. "She'd had a falling out with the family before I was born, changed our last name. I grew up knowing I had a cousin somewhere, but I never knew her name, never thought—" He swallowed hard. "Not until that night at the diner, when you mentioned your father, showed me that picture you carried. I saw the resemblance then, started asking questions." Emma slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold floor, her hands pressed to her stomach where their child was growing. "You knew," she said, the betrayal cutting deeper than she'd thought possible. "All this time, you knew we were cousins, and you said nothing." "I found out the day before I left," Jake said desperately. "I hired someone to look into it, to be sure. When the confirmation came back, I didn't know how to tell you. So you just disappeared instead." Emma's voice was flat, emotionless. "Left me thinking I'd done something wrong, that I wasn't enough. I thought I was protecting you." "From what? The truth?" She looked up at him, seeing a stranger where the man she'd loved used to be. "What about now, Jake? What about our baby?" The morning sun filtered through the hospital blinds as Sarah adjusted the 4-drip for the patient in room 312. Her movements were mechanical, practiced, but her mind kept drifting to the conversation she'd overheard between 2 detectives outside Marcus's room the night before. Something about missing evidence, and a case that had gone cold 5 years ago. She finished her rounds early, her curiosity gnawing at her like a persistent ache. Marcus had been asking for her specifically, refusing to speak with the police until she was present. The request had puzzled the nursing staff, but Sarah understood the weight behind it. Whatever secrets he carried, he trusted her with them. Or perhaps he simply had no other choice. When she entered his room, Marcus was sitting up, his color better than it had been since the accident. The ventilator had been removed, replaced by a simple oxygen cannula. His dark eyes tracked her movement as she checked his chart, and she could feel the intensity of his gaze like a physical presence. "You look better," she said, keeping her voice professionally neutral despite the storm of emotions churning beneath the surface. "Sarah." Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "We need to talk before they come back." She glanced toward the door, then moved closer to his bed. "The police? What do they want with you, Marcus?" He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, she saw something that made her breath catch. Fear, not for himself, but for her. "There are things you don't know about why I left," he said quietly. "Things I couldn't tell you then, because I thought keeping you in the dark would keep you safe." The baby shifted restlessly in her womb, as if responding to her elevated heart rate. She placed a protective hand over her belly, a gesture that didn't escape Marcus's notice. His eyes followed the movement, and something raw and vulnerable flickered across his features. "5 years ago, I witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see," he continued. "A drug deal gone wrong, 3 men dead, and one of them was a federal agent working undercover. I was supposed to be the 4th body, but I got lucky, barely escaped with evidence that could bring down a major trafficking operation." Sarah felt the room tilt slightly. "So you just disappeared?" "I went into witness protection, had to cut all ties, leave everyone I cared about behind." His voice cracked on the last words. "Including you, especially you." The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. The sudden departure, the complete silence, the way he'd vanished without a trace. She'd spent months thinking she'd meant nothing to him, that their relationship had been casual and disposable. The truth was somehow worse. He'd made the choice to leave her behind without giving her the option to decide for herself. "You should have told me," she whispered, anger and hurt warring in her chest. "You should have let me choose." "Sarah, they killed 3 federal agents. What was I supposed to do? Paint a target on your back too?" His hands clenched into fists. "I loved you too much to destroy your life." The past tense hit her like a physical blow. Loved, as in not anymore. Marcus seemed to realize his mistake immediately. "Love," he corrected quietly. "I love you. That never changed, not for a single day." Before she could respond, footsteps approached in the hallway. Marcus's entire body tensed, and she saw him glance toward the small bag of his personal effects on the bedside table. "Whatever happens next," he said urgently, "I need you to know that being back here, seeing you again, it's not coincidence. I was trying to get back to you when the accident happened. The case is finally going to trial, and after 5 years of hiding, I thought maybe—" The door opened, and Detective Morrison entered with his partner, a stern-faced woman Sarah didn't recognize. They both looked surprised to see her there. "Miss Chen," Detective Morrison said with forced politeness, "we need to speak with Mr. Reed privately." Sarah looked between Marcus and the detectives, sensing undercurrents she couldn't quite grasp. "I should go check on my other patients." As she moved toward the door, Marcus called her name. She turned back to find him watching her with an expression of desperate longing. "The offer still stands," he said cryptically. "If you want to hear the whole story." She nodded once, not trusting her voice, and stepped into the hallway. Through the partially open door, she heard Detective Morrison's voice, low and urgent. "Mr. Reed, we have a problem. Someone leaked your location to the press. Your cover is blown, and we have reason to believe Vincent Corelli's people are already in town." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Whatever Marcus had witnessed, whatever evidence he carried, it had followed him here. And now, just by being near him, she might have put herself and her unborn child directly in the crosshairs of people who had already killed to keep their secrets buried. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor buzzed overhead as Maya walked toward Jake's room, her heart hammering against her ribs. 3 days had passed since their confrontation, 3 days of avoiding his wing entirely while the weight of unspoken truths pressed down on her chest like a stone. She paused outside his door, watching through the small windows. He stared at the ceiling, his face gaunt but alert. The bandages around his head had been reduced to a small patch at his temple, and the monitors showed steady, improving vital signs. He was healing, physically at least. Taking a deep breath, she knocked softly and entered without waiting for permission. Jake's eyes found hers immediately, and she saw something flicker across his features. Relief, perhaps, or maybe just resignation. "Maya, we need to talk." She closed the door behind her and moved to the chair beside his bed, her hands instinctively resting on the gentle swell of her belly. "About everything." He shifted uncomfortably, wincing slightly. "I know you hate me. You have every right to—" "I don't hate you, Jake." The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him. "I did, for a long time. But sitting here seeing you like this, I just need to understand. Why did you leave?" His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might retreat behind the same walls he'd built 5 years ago. Then his shoulders sagged, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I was a coward." The simple honesty of it hit her harder than any elaborate excuse could have. She waited, sensing there was more. "My father called that night," Jake continued, his gaze fixed on his hands. "The night before I was supposed to pick you up for the courthouse. He told me about the trust fund, about the conditions." Maya frowned. "What conditions?" "That I couldn't access any of it if I was married before 25. And if I had children," he swallowed hard, "if I had children, I'd be cut off completely, written out of everything." The pieces began falling into place, each one more painful than the last. "So you chose the money?" "I chose what I thought was practical." His eyes met hers, desperate for understanding. "I was 23, Maya. Broke, scared, and convinced I'd drag you down with me. I thought I was protecting you from a life of struggle." "That wasn't your choice to make." The words burst out of her before she could stop them. "We were supposed to make that choice together. We were supposed to be a team." "I know." His voice cracked. "I know, and I've regretted it every single day since." Maya stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The parking lot stretched out below, filled with cars belonging to people dealing with their own crises, their own impossible choices. "Do you have any idea what that did to me? I waited for 3 hours, Jake, 3 hours in that stupid white dress, thinking something terrible had happened to you. Something terrible had happened. I lost my nerve. I lost everything that mattered." She turned back to face him, tears blurring her vision. "I was pregnant." The words hung in the air between them like a blade. Jake's face went completely white, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. "I was going to tell you after the ceremony," Maya continued, her voice steady despite the tears. "I wanted it to be a surprise, a wedding gift. But you never showed up, Maya." His voice was broken, barely recognizable. "What happened to—" "I lost the baby at 12 weeks. The clinical words couldn't begin to capture the devastation she'd felt, the way her world had crumbled piece by piece. I lost everything in the span of a month. You, our future, our child." Jake's face crumpled, and she saw tears streaming down his cheeks. "God, Maya, I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry." For a moment, the only sound was his ragged breathing and the steady beep of the monitors. Then Maya wiped her eyes and sat back down, suddenly exhausted. "I need you to know something," she said quietly. "This baby I'm carrying now, it's not yours." Jake nodded, struggling to compose himself. "I figured. The timing—" "His name is David. He's a good man, and he loves me." She paused, studying Jake's face. "But we're not together anymore." Something shifted in Jake's expression, but he remained silent. "I broke up with him because being around you again, even like this, made me realize I was settling, that I was choosing safe over real, practical over passionate." She stood again, smoothing down her scrubs. "I won't make that mistake again, but I also won't let myself be destroyed by the past." She moved toward the door, then stopped. You asked me to forgive you, Jake. I'm working on it. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean going back. As she reached for the door handle, his voice stopped her. Maya? Who did this to me? The accident? Do they know who ran me off the road? She turned, seeing genuine confusion in his eyes. What do you mean? Jake, you crashed. There was no other vehicle involved. His brow furrowed deeply. That's not right. Someone was following me. Black sedan, tinted windows. They forced me off the road. The pregnancy test slipped from Sarah's trembling fingers, clattering onto the bathroom floor of her cramped apartment. 2 pink lines stared back at her, as clear and undeniable as the morning sun streaming through her bedroom window. She pressed her back against the cool tile wall, sliding down until she sat on the floor, knees drawn to her chest. 8 weeks. It had to be 8 weeks since that night with Marcus at the cabin, when everything between them had shifted, when years of careful distance had crumbled in a moment of desperate need and familiar touch. The same night she'd finally let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other, before the lies, before discovering the real reason he'd left her the first time. Sarah's phone buzzed against the bathroom counter. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. The same name that had been calling and texting for 3 days straight since she'd walked out of his hospital room. She watched it ring until voicemail picked up, then immediately start buzzing again. This time it was Elena. Sarah, honey, where are you? Marcus is asking for you every 5 minutes. The man's about to check himself out of the hospital just to come find you. Sarah closed her eyes. I can't see him right now. What happened? When I left you 2 alone the other night, everything seemed like a lie. Sarah cut her off, because it was. Elena's pause stretched long enough that Sarah wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, her friend's voice came through, gentler now. Whatever he told you, whatever you found out, maybe there's more to the story. There's always more to the story with Marcus. Sarah hauled herself up from the floor, catching her reflection in the mirror. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her scrubs hung loose on her frame. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman whose world had been turned upside down twice in 1 week. That's the problem. Sarah, I'm pregnant. The words tumbled out before she could stop them, filling the small bathroom with their weight. Sarah heard Elena's sharp intake of breath through the phone. Oh, honey, is it his? Yes. Sarah's free hand drifted to her still flat stomach. 8 weeks. Does he know? No. And I don't know if I'm going to tell him. Sarah walked into her living room, staring at the medical journals scattered across her coffee table, the quiet life she'd built for herself. How can I trust him with this when I couldn't trust him with the truth about why he left? What did he tell you? About leaving? Sarah sank onto her couch, pulling a throw pillow into her lap. He said his father threatened my career, my family, said he was protecting me. Her voice cracked. But Elena, his father died 2 years ago. 2 years. Marcus could have come back, could have explained, but he didn't. He stayed away and built a whole other life. Maybe he thought you'd moved on. Maybe he thought it was too late. Or maybe he just didn't want to come back. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Maybe saving him on that highway was just the universe's cruel joke, giving me closure by showing me exactly why I'm better off without him. Through her apartment window, Sarah could see the hospital in the distance, its windows catching the afternoon light. Somewhere in there, Marcus was probably charming the nurses, deflecting questions about his pain levels with that crooked smile she knew too well. The same smile that had made her fall in love with him at 19. The same smile that had convinced her to let him back into her heart just days ago. I have to go, she told Elena. I need to think. Sarah, wait. Whatever you decide about Marcus, about the baby, you don't have to do it alone. You know that, right? Sarah nodded even though Elena couldn't see her. I know. Thank you. After hanging up, she sat in the growing shadows of her living room as evening approached. Her hand remained pressed against her stomach, where a cluster of cells no bigger than a blueberry was growing into something that would change everything. A child who would carry Marcus's eyes, maybe his stubborn streak, a child who deserved better than parents who couldn't trust each other. Her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Marcus or Elena, but an unknown number. "Is this Sarah Chen?" The voice was crisp, professional. "Yes. This is Detective Morrison with the State Police. I'm investigating the motorcycle accident from last week involving Marcus Webb. I understand you were the responding medical professional." Sarah's blood chilled. "Yes, that's right. Ma'am, we've discovered some irregularities in Mr. Webb's case. I'm going to need to speak with you about what you observed at the scene. When would be a good time for you to come in? The baby, Marcus, and now this." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the last pieces of her carefully ordered world crumble away. The monitor's steady beeping filled the silence as Sarah stood frozen in the doorway of Marcus's room. The manila envelope felt heavy in her hands, its contents having shifted everything she thought she knew about their past. Dr. Chen had left 20 minutes ago, but she hadn't moved, caught between the urge to confront him and the need to protect herself from more revelations. Marcus stirred, his eyes opening slowly. When he saw her, something flickered across his face, relief mixed with wariness. "How long have you been standing there?" His voice was stronger today, though still rough around the edges. "Long enough." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "We need to talk." He tried to sit up straighter, wincing as the movement pulled at his injuries. "Sarah, I know you have questions." "Questions?" She held up the envelope. "I think I'm past questions, Marcus. I found this in your jacket, the one the paramedics cut off you." His face went pale. "You weren't supposed to see that." "No, I imagine I wasn't. Just like I wasn't supposed to know about a lot of things." She moved closer to his bed, her heart pounding. "Care to explain why you have medical records with my name on them? Records from 5 years ago?" Marcus closed his eyes, his jaw tightening. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been keeping tabs on me, like you knew exactly what happened after you left." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the mechanical sounds of the medical equipment. When he finally opened his eyes, the pain in them went far beyond his physical injuries. "I hired a private investigator," he said quietly. "After I left. I needed to know you were okay." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "You what?" "I was trying to protect you, Sarah. From my family, from the threats. By spying on me." Her voice rose, and she forced herself to lower it. "By having someone follow me around, document my life like I was some kind of suspect." "It wasn't like that." He reached toward her, but she stepped back. "I needed to know you were safe, that my leaving had actually protected you." "Protected me from what?" The question came out as barely a whisper. Marcus's hands clenched into fists on the white hospital sheets. "My father, his business associates, people who would have used you to get to me." "That's not an answer. That's another riddle wrapped in more secrets." She moved to the window, putting distance between them. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. "Do you know what that investigator documented, Marcus? Do you know what your little surveillance operation captured?" He didn't answer, but his breathing had become more labored. "The miscarriage." The words fell into the room like stones into still water. 3 weeks after you disappeared, alone in a hospital room, bleeding and broken, wondering why the man I loved had vanished without a word. "Sarah." "I'm not finished." She turned back to face him, tears threatening but not falling. "He documented my depression, my time off work, the nights I spent walking the halls of this very hospital, wondering if I'd imagined our entire relationship." Marcus's face crumpled. "I didn't know about the pregnancy. If I had, would it have changed anything? Would you have stayed if you'd known I was carrying your child?" "Yes." The word came out strangled, desperate. "God, Sarah, yes. I would have found another way." "Another way to what?" "You still haven't told me what you were running from." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. My father launders money for organized crime. Has for years. I found out, tried to go to the police, but he has people everywhere. When I threatened to expose him, he made it clear that anyone I cared about would pay the price. The room seemed to tilt. Sarah gripped the windowsill, processing his words. So you left to protect me. I left because 2 days after our last night together, someone broke into your apartment. Nothing was taken, but they left a message. Your photograph with your eyes cut out. Sarah's breath caught. She remembered coming home to find her door slightly ajar, the strange feeling that someone had been there. She'd convinced herself she was being paranoid. I couldn't risk it, Marcus continued. I couldn't risk them hurting you because of my family's sins. So you hurt me instead. The words came out hollow, drained of anger. You decided what I could handle, what I deserved to know. You took away my choice. I know. His voice broke. I know I did everything wrong. But Sarah, they're still out there. And now that I'm back, now that we've been seen together, what are you saying? He met her eyes, and she saw the fear there, raw and real. I'm saying you might be in danger again. The hospital corridor felt different at 3 in the morning, shadows stretching longer between the fluorescent lights that hummed their constant electric lullaby. Maya's sneakers squeaked softly against the linoleum as she made her rounds, checking on patients who slept fitfully in their beds. She paused outside room 247, her hand hovering over the door handle. 3 weeks had passed since she'd pulled Jake from that twisted wreckage. 3 weeks since her world had tilted on its axis. He was healing faster than anyone had expected, his broken ribs mending, the swelling in his brain completely gone. The doctors called it remarkable. Maya called it complicated. She pushed open the door to find him sitting up in bed, staring out the window at the city lights below. He turned when he heard her enter, and that familiar ache bloomed in her chest, the same one she'd carried for 5 years, the one she thought had finally healed. Can't sleep? She asked, keeping her voice professionally neutral. Never could, after midnight. You remember. She did remember. Those long nights when they'd been together, when sleep seemed less important than talking until dawn, sharing dreams that now felt like they belonged to different people entirely. Discharge papers are being processed tomorrow, she said, checking his chart even though she'd memorized every detail. Dr. Morrison wants to see you at 9. Jake nodded, but his eyes never left her face. Maya, we need to talk, really talk, not these careful conversations we've been having. She felt the baby shift inside her, a gentle reminder of all the reasons this was dangerous territory. At 6 months, her pregnancy was becoming impossible to hide, though Jake hadn't said anything about it. Sometimes she caught him looking at her with a question in his eyes, but he never asked. There's nothing to talk about, she said, moving to check the 4 that had been removed days ago. Anything to avoid his gaze. The letters I wrote you, don't. The word came out sharper than she intended. Just don't, Jake. You never got them, did you? The question hung in the air between them like smoke. Maya's hand stilled on the blood pressure cuff she'd been pretending to organize. She'd wondered, in those first desperate months after he'd left, why he never called, never wrote. Then the wondering had turned to anger, and the anger had eventually crystallized into acceptance. I got them, she lied. All 43 of them? The number hit her like a physical blow. She turned to face him, seeing something raw and vulnerable in his expression that made her chest tighten. I wrote you every week for almost a year, he continued. I know you never got them because Sarah told me she intercepted them all. Sarah, Maya's sister who'd held her while she cried, who'd helped her pick up the pieces when Jake disappeared without explanation. Sweet, protective Sarah, who'd sworn she didn't know where he'd gone or why. You're lying. I found out 3 days before the accident. She called me, told me she was dying. Cancer. Said she needed to clear her conscience. Jake's voice was steady, but Maya could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the bedsheets. She thought she was protecting you. She said I'd only hurt you again if you knew the truth about why I left. The room seemed to spin slightly, and Maya gripped the back of the visitor's chair. What truth? My father found us together that night, the night I proposed. He threatened to destroy your nursing career before it even started, said he'd make sure you never worked in medicine again. He had connections, influence. I believed him. Jake's laugh was bitter. I was 22 and terrified, and I thought I was protecting you by leaving. Maya stared at him, processing words that recontextualized 5 years of her life. The proposal she'd treasured as her last perfect memory with him, the night before everything fell apart. His father had been watching them. So you just left, disappeared. I went to California, worked construction, tried to forget you. But I couldn't. That's why I kept writing, even when you never responded. Sarah made me believe you hated me, that you'd moved on. I did move on, Maya whispered, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly. Jake followed the gesture, and understanding flickered across his face. The baby, he said quietly. How far along? 6 months. And the father? Maya met his eyes, seeing her own reflection in them, remembering all the reasons she'd fallen in love with him in the first place. He's a good man, stable, nothing like you. The words were meant to hurt, and from Jake's expression, they found their mark. But instead of anger, she saw only sadness. I'm glad, he said, and the sincerity in his voice nearly broke her. You deserve that. You always did. Outside, dawn was beginning to touch the horizon, painting the sky in shades of hope and possibility. Maya stood in that hospital room, between her past and her future, and felt the foundation of everything she thought she knew shifting beneath her feet. The fluorescent lights in the hospital corridor buzzed overhead as Sarah made her way to room 314, her heart hammering against her ribs. 3 days had passed since Marcus had whispered those words that shattered everything she thought she knew. 3 days of avoiding his calls, his texts, his desperate attempts to explain. But Dr. Chen's urgent message had changed everything. Marcus was asking for her, and his condition was deteriorating. She paused outside his door, one hand instinctively moving to her belly where their child grew. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was carrying new life while he might be slipping away from his old one. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. Marcus looked smaller somehow, diminished by the machines that surrounded him. His eyes found hers immediately, and she saw relief flood his features. You came, he said, his voice hoarse. Dr. Chen said you were asking for me. Sarah remained by the door, unwilling to step closer. What did you mean, Marcus? About the accident not being random? He struggled to sit up straighter, wincing as the movement pulled at his injuries. Sarah, please, sit down. I need to tell you everything. Against her better judgment, she moved to the chair beside his bed but kept her distance. Start talking. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, gathering strength. When he opened them again, she saw a depth of pain that went far beyond his physical injuries. The night I left you 5 years ago, he began. I got a phone call. A man named Vincent Torino. He said if I didn't disappear from your life completely, something terrible would happen to you. Sarah's blood ran cold. What are you talking about? My father wasn't just a mechanic, Sarah. He worked for the Torino family, laundering money through his shop. When he died, Vincent came to collect on debts I didn't even know existed. $200,000. Marcus's hands clenched the bedsheets. I couldn't pay it. So Vincent made me a deal. Work for him, use my medical knowledge to help when his people got hurt and couldn't go to hospitals. In exchange, he'd forgive the debt. So you just left, without telling me? I tried to refuse at first. That's when he showed me pictures of you, of your apartment, your schedule, the route you took to work. He said you'd have an accident if I didn't cooperate. A very permanent one. Marcus's voice broke. I couldn't let that happen, so I took the deal and got as far away from you as I could. Sarah felt the room spinning around her, the Marcus she'd fallen in love with, the gentle man who'd held her through nightmares and brought her coffee every morning. He'd been living a double life. For 5 years? She whispered. For 5 years I patched up criminals and drug dealers. I saved lives I probably shouldn't have saved, all while telling myself it was to protect you." He turned to look at her fully. But Vincent got greedier. He wanted me to do more than just treat injuries. He wanted me to help with organ trafficking, to use my medical connections. When I refused, he decided I was a liability. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The accident wasn't an accident. Vincent's men ran me off the road. They thought they'd killed me. A bitter laugh escaped him. Instead, they delivered me right to the one person I'd spent 5 years trying to protect. Sarah stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Below, traffic moved in orderly patterns through the city streets, people living normal lives unburdened by the dark secrets that seemed to follow her everywhere. "You should have told me," she said without turning around. "You should have trusted me enough to let me make my own choices." "You're right, but I was 25 and terrified, and I thought I was being noble." His voice was barely audible. "I know now that I was just being a coward." She turned back to face him, and the raw vulnerability in his expression made her chest tighten. "What happens now?" "Vincent still thinks you're dead, as far as I know. But if he finds out I'm alive, he'll come after you, after us." Sarah's hand moved to her belly again. "Our baby. That's why I need to disappear again, Sarah. As soon as I'm well enough, I have to go where Vincent can't find me. It's the only way to keep you safe." "No." The word came out stronger than she'd intended. "We're not doing this again. I won't let you run away and make decisions for both of us." "Sarah, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." She moved closer to his bed, her jaw set with determination. "You made one choice 5 years ago out of fear. Now we make a different choice. Together." Marcus stared at her, hope and terror warring in his eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we fight back." The hospital corridors felt different now, charged with an undercurrent of danger that made Sarah's skin crawl. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every unfamiliar face made her pulse quicken. She'd insisted on returning to work despite Marcus's protests, claiming that hiding would only make things worse. But as she made her rounds, checking on patients and updating charts, she couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching her every move. Dr. Patricia Chen found her in the supply closet, methodically counting inventory with shaking hands. "Sarah, you shouldn't be here. Not after what happened at your apartment." "I'm fine," Sarah lied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Besides, what am I supposed to do? Hide forever? The people who are after Marcus aren't going to stop just because I'm scared." Patricia closed the closet door behind her, creating a small bubble of privacy in the busy hospital. Marcus told Detective Morrison everything about his brother's work with organized crime. "The police are building a case, but these people, they don't wait for justice to run its course." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her belly, where the baby seemed to respond to her stress with restless movements. "That's exactly why I need to keep working, keep some semblance of normal. This baby needs stability, not a mother who falls apart every time someone threatens us. And what happens if they decide you're too much of a liability? What if they think you know something about what Daniel was involved in?" The question hung between them like a physical weight. Sarah had been trying not to think about the implications of Marcus's revelations about his brother's death. Daniel had been laundering money through a series of shell companies, skimming profits from criminal enterprises that reached into every corner of the city. When he'd tried to get out, to disappear with evidence that could bring down powerful people, he'd signed his own death warrant. "I don't know anything," Sarah whispered. "I met Daniel exactly twice, both times briefly." "But they don't know that, do they?" Before Patricia could answer, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, meeting Morrison at precinct. "Stay at hospital until I get back. Don't go anywhere alone." The irony wasn't lost on her. The man who had once left her without a backward glance was now desperately trying to protect her. The transformation still felt surreal, like watching a stranger wear Marcus's face. But the fear in his eyes when he'd held her after the break-in had been devastatingly real. Her shift continued without incident until late afternoon, when a commotion in the emergency department drew her attention. Two men in expensive suits were arguing with the desk nurse, demanding information about patient records. Something about their aggressive posture, the way they scanned the room with predatory awareness, made Sarah's blood run cold. She ducked into the nearest patient room, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the partially open door, she could hear fragments of their conversation. The nurse who was involved in the accident, Sarah Chen. "Sir, I cannot provide patient information without proper authorization." They had her name wrong, confusing her with Dr. Chen, but the intent was clear enough. Sarah fumbled for her phone, trying to text Marcus with trembling fingers, when she heard footsteps approaching the room. "Excuse me, miss?" One of the suited men appeared in the doorway, his smile cold and calculating. "I'm looking for Sarah Chen. I understand she works in this department." Sarah forced herself to remain calm, adopting the professional demeanor that had served her through countless medical emergencies. "I'm sorry, but Dr. Chen isn't available right now. If you'd like to leave a message with administration." The man stepped fully into the room, and Sarah noticed the bulge of a concealed weapon beneath his jacket. "Actually, I think there's been some confusion. We're looking for a nurse, not a doctor. Sarah Martinez? She was involved in a motorcycle accident a few weeks ago. The fact that they knew her maiden name sent ice through her veins. These weren't random criminals following a vague lead. They had done their research, traced connections, built a profile of her life. The only reason they'd mixed up her identity with Patricia's was luck, a clerical error that might be the only thing standing between her and whatever they had planned. "I don't know anyone by that name," Sarah lied smoothly. "But like I said, administration might be able to help you." The man studied her face for a long moment, and Sarah felt exposed, as if he could see through her deception by sheer force of will. Then his phone rang, a sharp sound that made them both jump. "Yeah?" He turned slightly away, listening to whoever was on the other end. "Are you sure?" "All right, we'll check there instead." He ended the call and looked back at Sarah with renewed suspicion. "If you do happen to see this Sarah Martinez, tell her some old friends would like to catch up." The threat in his voice was unmistakable, and Sarah nodded wordlessly as he left the room. Only when she heard the elevator doors close did she allow herself to breathe again, her hands shaking as she finally managed to send Marcus a text. "They found me." The hospital corridor stretched endlessly before Maya as she walked toward the conference room, her footsteps echoing against the polished linoleum. Dr. Richardson had called an emergency meeting about Jake's case, and the gravity in his voice had sent ice through her veins. She pressed one hand protectively against her rounded belly, feeling the baby's reassuring movement beneath her palm. Through the glass windows, she could see several figures already seated around the oval table: Dr. Richardson, the hospital administrator, and two people she didn't recognize in dark suits. Federal agents, she realized with a sinking heart. "Maya, please sit," Dr. Richardson said as she entered, his usually warm demeanor replaced by professional distance. "This is Agent Collins and Agent Martinez from the DEA." Agent Collins, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair, opened a thick manila folder. "Miss Chen, we need to discuss your relationship with Jacob Morrison." "His name is Jake Parker," Maya said automatically, then felt foolish as the agents exchanged glances. "Jacob Morrison is his legal name," Agent Martinez explained, his voice gentler than his partner's. "Jake Parker was an alias he used while undercover. We understand this is difficult, but we need you to understand the full scope of what's happening here." Maya's hands trembled as she folded them in her lap. "I don't understand. Undercover? Jake wasn't police." Agent Collins spread several photographs across the table, surveillance shots of Jake with various men Maya didn't recognize, documents with official seals, and what looked like evidence photos. "Mr. Morrison has been working with our task force for the past 18 months, infiltrating a drug trafficking operation that spans 3 states. The room seemed to tilt around Maya. "That's impossible. Jake left town years ago. He abandoned—" She stopped, realizing how naive she sounded. The night he left, Agent Martinez said carefully, he'd been recruited by our Seattle field office. His background, his connections here, made him an ideal candidate to go deep undercover. The operation required complete cover, no contact with his previous life. He volunteered, Agent Collins added, watching Maya's face closely. But he also specifically requested that we monitor you discreetly, ensure your safety. He knew there might be blowback if his cover was ever compromised. Maya felt the baby kick hard, as if responding to her spike of adrenaline. Monitor me? For how long? 4 years, Agent Martinez admitted. We've had agents check on you periodically. We knew about your engagement to David, your pregnancy, your career advancement. Morrison insisted it was part of his cooperation agreement. The betrayal cut deeper than Maya had thought possible. Not only had Jake left without explanation, but he'd turned her life into some kind of surveillance project. So what changed? Why is he here now? Agent Collins closed the folder with a sharp snap. The operation went bad 3 weeks ago. Morrison's cover was blown during a raid in Portland. The cartel put a price on his head, and he was trying to reach our safe house when the accident occurred. He was running for his life, Dr. Richardson said quietly. The motorcycle crash likely saved him from an assassination attempt. Maya stared at the table, processing the information. The Jake she'd known, or thought she'd known, hadn't been real. The man lying unconscious upstairs was a stranger who'd been living a lie for years, even as he'd somehow tried to protect her from the shadows. There's more, Agent Collins continued. The cartel knows he survived. They've traced him here. We have reason to believe they're already in the area. Fear shot through Maya like electricity. Are you saying I'm in danger? My baby? We're implementing protective measures immediately, Agent Martinez assured her. But you need to understand, your connection to Morrison puts you at risk. These people don't distinguish between targets and collateral damage. Maya stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I need to see him. I need to hear this from Jake himself. That's not advisable, Agent Collins began, but Maya was already moving toward the door. Miss Chen, Dr. Richardson called after her. He's awake. Maya froze in the doorway, her heart hammering against her ribs. After everything, the years of wondering, the sleepless nights, the carefully constructed life she'd built on the ashes of their relationship, Jake was finally conscious. Finally able to answer the questions that had haunted her. But now those questions seemed insignificant compared to the larger truth. She was connected to a man who lived in a world of violence and deception, and that connection had just painted a target on her and her unborn child. Give me 5 minutes with him, she said without turning around. Then we'll discuss protection details and safe houses and whatever else needs to happen. But first, I need 5 minutes to look into his eyes and decide if anything between us was ever real. The agents started to protest, but Maya was already walking down the corridor toward Jake's room, her hand protective over her belly, preparing herself to face the stranger who had once been the love of her life. The sterile hospital corridor stretched endlessly before Maya as she walked toward David's room, each step heavier than the last. 3 days had passed since his confession. 3 days of sleepless nights and agonizing decisions. The manila envelope in her hand contained the DNA test results they'd both agreed to take, the final piece of a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted completed. Dr. Richardson had cleared David for discharge that morning, but he'd insisted on staying until Maya returned with the results. She'd seen him through the window earlier, sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at his hands with the same haunted expression he'd worn since telling her about the night that changed everything. Maya paused outside his door, pressing her free hand against her swollen belly. The baby had been restless all morning, as if sensing her turmoil. She closed her eyes, remembering David's broken voice as he'd recounted that terrible evening 8 years ago, how he'd been forced to choose between protecting her and saving his younger sister from their father's violent rage. I couldn't let him hurt her the way he hurt me, David had whispered, tears streaming down his face. Emma was only 16, and she'd called me, terrified. He'd found out she was gay, and he was drunk again, angrier than I'd ever seen him. I knew what he was capable of. The choice David had made, disappearing without explanation to draw his father's attention away from Emma, had seemed like the only option at the time. But the cost had been Maya's heart, her trust, her belief in their future together. She pushed open the door and found David fully dressed, his discharge papers folded neatly on the bedside table. He looked up as she entered, his eyes immediately finding the envelope in her hand. Maya. He stood slowly, favoring his still-healing ribs. You came back. I said I would. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. She moved to the window, needing distance between them as she gathered her courage. I've been thinking about what you told me, about Emma, about your father. I know it doesn't excuse what I did to you, David said quietly. Nothing could excuse that. Maya turned to face him, studying the man she'd once loved completely. His physical wounds were healing, but the emotional scars ran deeper than she'd ever imagined. I called Emma, she said, watching his eyes widen in surprise. I found her on social media. We talked for 2 hours yesterday. David's face went pale. What did she tell you? Everything. Maya's voice caught slightly. She told me about the years of abuse, about that night when your father nearly killed her. She told me how you gave up your scholarship, your apartment, your life here to keep him focused on you instead of her. She told me about the hospital visits, the broken bones, the concussions. David closed his eyes, a muscle in his jaw twitching. She wasn't supposed to know about that. I made sure she never saw. She knew, David. She always knew. Maya stepped closer, her heart breaking all over again. She also told me something else, about the letters. His eyes snapped open, meeting hers with a mixture of hope and terror. You wrote to me, Maya continued, her voice barely above a whisper. 57 letters over 3 years, explaining everything, begging for my forgiveness. Emma said you never sent them because you were afraid your father would find out and come after me instead. David's shoulders sagged as if a weight he'd carried for years was finally being acknowledged. I wanted to tell you so many times, but he made it clear that if I ever contacted you, if I ever came back, he'd make you pay for it. And after Emma turned 18 and got away from him, it felt too late. You'd moved on. You deserved better than the mess I'd become. Maya pulled the envelope from behind her back, her hands trembling slightly. The test results came in this morning. David's breath caught. They both knew what those results would confirm, that he was indeed the father of her child, conceived during their one night together 8 months ago, when she'd found him broken and desperate on that highway. Before I open this, Maya said, I need you to know something. Emma told me about your father's death 6 months ago. She told me that you were finally free, that you'd been trying to find the courage to come back to me. Maya, and I need you to know that this baby, regardless of what this paper says, this baby was conceived from more than just one night. It was conceived from 8 years of unfinished love, from questions that needed answers, from a connection that never truly died. She handed him the envelope, her decision finally clear. Whatever the results said, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Some love stories, she realized, weren't meant to be simple. Some love stories required forgiveness, understanding, and the courage to begin again. The morning light filtered through the hospital blinds as Sarah sat beside Marcus's bed, her hand resting protectively over her swollen belly. 3 days had passed since the confrontation with Vincent Carrera's men, and while Marcus's physical wounds were healing, she could see the deeper scars still roar in his eyes. Detective Rodriguez had been by twice already, each visit bringing more disturbing revelations about the pharmaceutical conspiracy Marcus had uncovered. The flash drive contained evidence of clinical trial manipulations, bribed officials, and a cover-up that reached into the highest levels of Meridian Industries. Marcus hadn't just been a courier, he'd been an unwitting participant in human experimentation that had killed dozens. The district attorney wants to offer you full immunity, Rodriguez had said during his last visit. Your testimony could bring down the entire operation. But Sarah knew the decision was tearing Marcus apart. speaking out meant reliving every horrible detail, facing the families of those who had died because of medications he had unknowingly helped rush to market. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Chen peered around the door, her expression carefully neutral. "Sarah, could I speak with you for a moment?" Sarah's stomach clenched. She'd been dreading this conversation, knowing it was inevitable. She kissed Marcus's forehead. He was sleeping, finally peaceful after another nightmare-filled night, and followed Dr. Chen into the hallway. The hospital board met this morning. Dr. Chen began without preamble. They're aware of the situation with Marcus, the shooting, everything that's happened. "I saved his life," Sarah said quietly. "I followed protocol. You did more than that, and we both know it." Dr. Chen's voice wasn't unkind, but it carried the weight of institutional authority. "You've been emotionally involved from the beginning. You should have disclosed your prior relationship with the patient." Sarah felt her world tilting. "Are you firing me?" "I'm recommending a leave of absence, paid through your maternity leave. When you're ready to return, we can discuss your future here." Dr. Chen touched Sarah's shoulder gently. "You're a brilliant nurse, Sarah, but you crossed lines. The board is being lenient because of your exemplary record and the extraordinary circumstances." After Dr. Chen left, Sarah stood alone in the sterile hallway, processing the reality that her career, the one constant in her life, was now in jeopardy. She thought of the baby growing inside her, of the uncertain future spreading out before them all. When she returned to the room, Marcus was awake, studying her face with those perceptive eyes that never missed anything. "Bad news?" he asked. She told him about the leave of absence, watching his expression shift from concern to something harder. "This is my fault," he said, struggling to sit up straighter. "Everything that's happened to you, the danger, your job—" "Stop." She moved to his bedside, taking his hand. "I made my choices, every single one of them. Choices you wouldn't have had to make if I hadn't been such a coward 5 years ago." His voice was rough with emotion. "If I had stayed, if I had trusted you enough to tell you about my family, about who I really was." "Can't change the past, Marcus." She felt the baby kick, as if responding to their raised voices. "The question is what we do now." He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Rodriguez thinks Carrera will take a plea deal, probably 20 years minimum. And the others? Federal prosecutors are building cases against everyone involved. It'll take months, maybe years, but they think they can dismantle the entire network." He looked up at her, his eyes haunted. "But it means I'll be testifying, probably for months. Going into witness protection might be—" "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "We're not running anymore. Sarah, you don't understand the risks." "I understand perfectly." She felt a fierce protectiveness rise within her, not just for the child she carried, but for the future they might still have together. "I understand that Vincent Carrera is going to prison. I understand that his organization is being destroyed. And I understand that we've already lost 5 years being afraid." Marcus stared at her, something shifting in his expression. For the first time since she'd found him bleeding on that highway, she saw hope flickering behind the fear. "The baby," he said softly. "When you have the ultrasound next week, could I be there?" The question was tentative, vulnerable in a way that made her heart ache. She thought of all the appointments she'd attended alone, all the moments she'd imagined sharing with someone who cared. "I'd like that," she whispered. Outside, rain began to fall against the windows, washing away the last traces of a violent storm that had nearly destroyed them both. But here, in this quiet room, with their hands intertwined and their child moving between them, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt like she was finally home. The morning sun streamed through the hospital windows as Sarah finished her last set of rounds. Her replacement had arrived early, eager to start the weekend shift, and for the first time in weeks, Sarah felt the weight of exhaustion lifting from her shoulders. She pressed a hand to her growing belly, feeling the gentle flutter of movement that had become more frequent lately. "Ready to go home?" Marcus appeared beside her, his own shift having ended an hour ago. He'd waited, patient as always, reading in the family lounge while she completed her paperwork. "More than ready," she said, leaning into his warmth. The familiar comfort of his presence still amazed her sometimes, how easily they'd fallen back into sync, as if the years between them had been nothing more than a pause in conversation. They walked toward the elevator together, passing the trauma bay where everything had started 3 months ago. Sarah paused, remembering that night when she'd pulled over on the dark highway, never imagining that saving a stranger's life would resurrect her own past. The irony wasn't lost on her that the place where people came to heal had become where she and Marcus had finally found their way back to each other. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, following her gaze. "Just how strange life is, all the paths that led us here." The elevator doors opened, revealing Dr. Chen, who smiled when she saw them. "Sarah, I'm glad I caught you. I wanted to let you know, we got word from the prosecutor's office. James Morrison accepted the plea deal, 25 years, no possibility of parole for 15. Sarah nodded, feeling a complex mix of relief and sadness. Morrison, the man who'd been blackmailing Marcus, who'd killed Detective Rivera in his desperation to keep his money laundering operation hidden, would finally face justice. But knowing that didn't erase the pain his actions had caused, the life that had been lost, or the years she and Marcus had spent apart because of his web of corruption. "Thank you for telling me," Sarah said. Dr. Chen stepped off the elevator, and as the doors closed, Marcus took Sarah's hand. "It's really over now," he said quietly. "Yes, it is." They rode down in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The past months had been a whirlwind of police interviews, legal proceedings, and painful revelations about the night Marcus had left. Learning that he'd been protecting her from Morrison's threats didn't erase the hurt she'd felt, but understanding his reasons had made forgiveness possible, more than possible, inevitable. Outside, the spring air was warm and sweet, with the scent of blooming trees. Marcus's motorcycle sat in the parking lot where he'd left it, gleaming in the afternoon sun. He'd been cleared to ride again just last week, his injuries from the accident finally healed. "Your chariot awaits," he said with a grin, holding up his helmet. Sarah laughed, shaking her head. "I think I'll stick to the car for a while," she patted her belly, "at least until this little one arrives." Marcus's expression grew tender as he moved closer, placing his hands gently over hers. "Have I mentioned lately how incredible you are? Saving my life, forgiving me for leaving, agreeing to try again." "Only about a dozen times this week," Sarah teased, but her heart swelled at his words. "I love you," he said, the simple declaration carrying the weight of everything they'd been through. "I loved you 6 years ago. I loved you even when I was gone, and I'll love you until my last breath." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. "I love you too. Even when I hated you, I loved you." He kissed her then, soft and sweet under the afternoon sun, and Sarah felt the last pieces of her guarded heart finally fall into place. They'd lost so much time, made so many mistakes, but somehow they'd found their way back to this moment. When they broke apart, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "So what now? What does our future look like?" Sarah smiled, thinking of the apartment they'd started looking at together, the nursery they'd begun planning, the small velvet box she'd glimpsed Marcus hiding in his jacket pocket last week. "I think," she said, "it looks like whatever we want it to look like. Together, together," he agreed, and the words sounded like a promise. They walked to their separate vehicles, planning to meet at home, a word that finally meant something real again. As Sarah drove through the familiar streets, she thought about second chances and the mysterious ways life could circle back on itself. 6 years ago, she'd lost everything. Today, she was driving toward a future she'd never dared to imagine. Behind her, she could see Marcus following on his motorcycle, keeping pace with her car. No longer running away, but choosing to stay. Choosing them. Choosing love, despite all the reasons it should have been impossible. The road ahead stretched out before them, full of promise.